Have you ever noticed that moment when everyone else seems to get it and you're still lost? The teacher moves on. Your classmates nod. Your coworkers look confident. And you're sitting there with that sinking feeling in your stomach, that heat rising in your face, thinking, why don't I understand this? What's wrong with me? There's something strange about struggling to understand things that seem to come easily to others. It's not just about the information you're missing. It's about what that struggle makes you believe about yourself. And here's the paradox. The people who struggle to understand things quickly are often the ones thinking the hardest, trying the most desperately, caring the most deeply about getting it right. But instead of seeing your effort, you only see your confusion. Instead of recognizing your persistence, you only feel your frustration. The person who gets it immediately doesn't know what it's like to read the same paragraph 5 times and still not absorb it. To sit through an explanation that makes perfect sense to everyone else, but sounds like a foreign language to you. To feel your brain fog over just when you need it most. So what's really happening in the psychology of someone who struggles to understand? And why does trying harder sometimes make it worse? Let's start with what it actually feels like when your brain won't cooperate. You're in class, or a meeting, or watching a tutorial. Someone is explaining something. The words are English. You recognize them individually. But somehow when they're strung together, they turn into a blur. It's like trying to grab smoke. The concept is right there, just out of reach. And the harder you grasp for it, the more it dissipates. You can almost feel it, this thing everyone else has already caught. But you can't quite hold it. And here's what makes it so frustrating. You want to understand. You're trying. You're concentrating so hard your head hurts. But your brain feels like it's wading through thick fog, moving in slow motion while everyone else races ahead. Cognitive psychology has a term for this: cognitive load. Your working memory, the mental space where you process new information, has limited capacity. And when that capacity gets overwhelmed, everything starts to break down. But here's what's fascinating. It's not that you're incapable of understanding. It's that your cognitive load is being consumed by something else. And that something is often anxiety. Think about what's happening in your mind when you're struggling to understand something. You're not just processing information, you're also monitoring yourself. Am I getting this? Why isn't this making sense? Everyone else understands. What's wrong with me? I look stupid. They're going to think I'm slow. I should get this. Why don't I get this? That internal commentary isn't separate from your struggle to understand. It's part of what's causing it. Here's the truth. Anxiety literally hijacks your cognitive resources. When you're anxious, your brain activates its threat detection system. Your amygdala fires up. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for complex thinking and learning, gets partially shut down, and your working memory capacity shrinks. Dr. Sion Bylock's research on performance anxiety shows that worry uses up the same mental resources you need for learning. It's like trying to run a computer program while simultaneously running a dozen other programs in the background. Everything slows down. So you're not struggling to understand because you're incapable. You're struggling because a significant portion of your mental bandwidth is being used to worry about the fact that you're struggling. And this creates what psychologists call a negative feedback loop. You struggle, which makes you anxious, which makes you struggle more, which makes you more anxious, and on and on. But here's where it gets complex. Your struggle feels worse because you're comparing your internal experience to everyone else's external presentation. You see their confident nods, their quick responses, their apparent ease. And you conclude, they understand. I don't. Therefore, something is wrong with me. But what you don't see is their internal experience. Maybe they're faking understanding because they're too embarrassed to admit confusion. Maybe they understood one aspect and aren't pretending they understood everything. Maybe they're just as lost as you, but better at hiding it. Or maybe, and this is important, they actually do understand more quickly than you. But that doesn't mean what you think it means. Different brains process information differently. Some people are quick processors. They grasp concepts rapidly, make connections fast. Other people are deep processors. They need more time, more examples, more repetition, but when they finally understand something, they understand it thoroughly. Neither is better. They're just different. But the psychology behind this runs deeper than processing speed. When you consistently struggle to understand things, especially in educational or professional settings, you start to internalize a narrative. I'm slow. I'm not smart. I'm not capable. And once that narrative takes root, it becomes a lens through which you interpret every struggle. Every moment of confusion becomes evidence confirming what you already believe about yourself. Now let's talk about something that often goes unrecognized. Sometimes struggling to understand isn't about anxiety or processing speed. Sometimes it's about learning differences. Conditions like ADHD, dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, or other neurodevelopmental differences can make certain types of learning genuinely more difficult. Not impossible, more difficult. If you have ADHD, your working memory might be compromised, making it hard to hold multiple pieces of information simultaneously. If you have an auditory processing difference, verbal explanations might not stick the way visual information does. If you're dyslexic, reading-heavy learning might require significantly more effort than it does for others. And here's what's really happening. You're not less intelligent. You're working with a brain that processes information differently, often in a school or work system designed for neurotypical brains. Dr. Thomas Armstrong's research on neurodiversity emphasizes that learning differences aren't deficits, they're variations. But when the only teaching method available doesn't match your learning style, you end up feeling inadequate when you're actually just mismatched. Think about it this way. If you're a visual learner, stuck in a purely lecture-based environment, struggling to understand isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of instruction to meet you where you are. But instead of recognizing the mismatch, you blame yourself. And this is where the psychology gets really heavy. Struggling to understand carries shame in a way that other struggles don't. If you struggle physically, people see the challenge. You're lifting a heavy weight, running a long distance. If you struggle emotionally, people might offer compassion. But if you struggle cognitively, that feels like a fundamental failure of who you are. Because in our culture, intelligence is treated as core to identity and worth. We say people are smart or are slow, as if these are fixed traits, permanent characteristics that define value. So when you struggle to understand something, it doesn't just feel frustrating. It feels humiliating, like you've been exposed as fundamentally inadequate. And shame has a particular effect on the brain. Dr. Brené Brown's research shows that shame activates the same neural networks as physical pain. But more than that, shame makes us want to hide, to withdraw, to avoid the very situations where we might learn. So you stop asking questions. You stop admitting confusion. You nod along, pretending to understand, because exposing your struggle feels more dangerous than staying lost. And this creates a terrible irony. The shame of not understanding prevents you from getting the help you need to understand. You become trapped in confusion, isolated by the very thing that could connect you to support. Let's talk about something people don't often acknowledge. Struggling to understand is exhausting. It's not just mentally tiring, it's existentially draining. Think about what it takes to get through a day when understanding doesn't come easily. You wake up already anxious about what you might not grasp today. Every meeting, every class, every interaction carries the potential for that moment of confusion, that feeling of being left behind. You spend extra hours trying to understand what others absorbed in minutes. You reread, you rewatch, you research, you ask for help, feel embarrassed, try to figure it out yourself, get more confused, reluctantly ask again. And even when you finally understand, there's no triumph, just relief that you're no longer lost, tinged with dread that tomorrow you'll have to do it all over again with something new. Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset emphasizes that struggle is a natural part of learning. But here's what often gets missed. There's a difference between productive struggle, the kind that leads to growth, and destructive struggle, the kind that leads to shame and shutdown. Productive struggle says, "This is hard and I'm learning." Destructive struggle says, "This is hard, therefore I'm inadequate." When you're trapped in destructive struggle, every moment of confusion reinforces your negative self-concept. And over time, this doesn't build resilience, it builds exhaustion. But here's where struggling to understand leaves one of its deepest marks. It shapes how you see yourself. When you consistently struggle while others seem to breeze through, you start to construct an identity around that struggle. I'm not a math person. I'm just not good at understanding technical things. I'm slow. These aren't just self-descriptions. They're self-limitations. Once you've decided you're not good at something, you stop trying. You avoid situations where you might have to engage with it. You protect yourself from the frustration by narrowing your world. And here's the truth. These identities are often lies built on incomplete information. Maybe you struggled with math because you had a teacher who couldn't explain it in a way that worked for your brain. Maybe you struggle with technical concepts because they're presented in jargon-heavy ways that obscure rather than clarify. Maybe you're slow because you're thorough, because you're anxious, because you're processing deeply. But once the identity forms, it becomes self-fulfilling. You believe you can't understand, so you approach new challenges with defeat already built in. And that defeat makes understanding harder, which confirms your belief. Psychologists call this a fixed mindset, the belief that your abilities are unchangeable. And research consistently shows that fixed mindset doesn't just limit learning, it creates the very struggles it assumes are inevitable. So what do you do with all of this? How do you exist in a world that values quick understanding when your brain doesn't work that way? Here's what won't work: trying to force yourself to understand faster, beating yourself up for confusion, pretending you get it when you don't. These strategies don't solve the problem, they compound it. The path forward starts with a radical reframe. Struggling to understand isn't evidence of inadequacy, it's evidence of engagement. Think about it. The person who doesn't care doesn't struggle. They just disengage. The person who's given up doesn't feel frustrated. They feel nothing. But you're frustrated because you care. You're struggling because you're trying. That frustration you feel, it's not weakness. It's proof that you haven't given up, that you still believe understanding is possible, that you're still showing up even when it's hard. And here's what's fascinating. Research on learning shows that struggle, the right kind of struggle, actually deepens understanding. Dr. Robert Bjork's work on desirable difficulties demonstrates that when learning comes too easily, it doesn't stick. The effort required to work through confusion creates stronger, more durable learning. So maybe your struggle isn't a bug, maybe it's a feature. But beyond reframing, there are practical strategies that can transform your relationship with understanding. First, externalize your thinking. Don't try to hold everything in your head. Write it down. Draw diagrams. Talk through your confusion out loud. Your brain isn't failing when it needs external support. It's using tools the way tools are meant to be used. Second, find your learning style. If verbal explanations don't work, find visual ones. If reading doesn't stick, watch videos. If abstract concepts confuse you, seek concrete examples. There's no virtue in struggling with a method that doesn't work for your brain. Third, break things down. When something feels overwhelming, it probably is. Make it smaller. Understand one piece at a time. Progress doesn't have to be linear or fast. It just has to be forward. Fourth, ask for help without shame. Everyone struggles to understand things sometimes. The difference is some people have learned that asking for help is smart, not weak. Find people who explain well. Find communities where questions are welcomed. Find teachers who remember what it's like to be confused. And finally, be compassionate with yourself. Your brain is doing its best with the resources it has. When it needs more time, give it time. When it needs rest, rest. When it needs help, ask. Remember that moment we started with? When everyone else seems to get it, and you're still lost? That moment doesn't define you. It doesn't measure your intelligence, your worth, or your potential. Here's what that moment actually is. It's an invitation. An invitation to ask questions, to dig deeper, to understand in your own way and on your own timeline. The person who understands immediately moves on. But you get to linger. You get to examine. You get to build understanding that's uniquely yours because you had to work for it. And here's what I need you to hear. Struggling to understand doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're human. Every single person who's ever learned anything has had moments of confusion, frustration, feeling lost. The difference isn't that some people never struggle. It's that some people have learned to struggle without shame. You're not broken. You're not slow. You're not inadequate. You're someone whose brain processes differently, who needs different approaches, who's working twice as hard and getting half the credit. And that's not failure. That's resilience. So the next time you're sitting there, confused while everyone else nods, remember this. Your confusion is the beginning of understanding, not the absence of it. You just need a little more time, a different explanation, a gentler approach. And you deserve all of those things. Understanding will come. Maybe not instantly, maybe not easily, but it will come. And when it does, it will be yours in a way it never could have been if it came without effort.